Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for coming back to Listening In, the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society podcast. In this series, we want to give you the opportunity to listen in to some of the conversations that we are lucky enough to have every day. That is, with a variety of people and organisations all working in the field of mental health and well-being. In our previous episode, we spoke with Cheryl Mead, the NCPS Regional Representative for Wales. And today, we're delighted to welcome Lynda Graham, our Regional Representative for Northern Ireland. Many practitioners will be familiar with Lynda, counsellor, supervisor and trainer who is a prominent and experienced voice across the profession, particularly on the subject of adoption. Lynda had a brief dalliance with accountancy before turning to social work as a more fulfilling and satisfying profession. And there, from her work with children and families, she took what felt like a natural progression into counselling. Lynda is a passionate advocate for counsellors and the profession as a whole, and especially keen to advocate for those living and working in Northern Ireland. And of course, while there's a need to recognise the specific challenges encountered there, Lynda is very clear that just as we all see the individual in our daily practice, we also need to see Northern Ireland as any other place with its own regional diversity and differences. We need to be mindful it's a tapestry woven together with many different threads, and it should not be defined by one story alone. But first of all, Lynda, just like I tend to ask most people when we have these conversations, it's really helpful. We all come into this profession from many different backgrounds and for many different reasons. And I wondered what's brought you to the place where you are now as an experienced practitioner, supervisor, trainer, and all these things that you now do for us.
So, I qualified as a social worker in 1986, but I was actually on my way to being an accountant or doing business studies, and then spent a summer working in a children's home and really enjoyed the work there. And some of the staff said, you need to think about social work. So I went off to University Open Day during the summer and was able to change my course. So it was a big change in direction, but it's never felt like a mistake. It was the right thing to do. So that was way back in the 80s, 82 to 86, did the social work degree, and then worked in family and childcare, which was child protection, at the coal face, working with families under pressure, providing support, and sometimes having to bring those children into care. So I did that for the first part of my career, and then got married and relocated. And at that stage, then I lectured for a bit because I didn't have a job. And a lecturing post came up and I went for that. So that was just for over a year. And then I felt like a caged animal. I loved the teaching. I loved the young people, but it wasn't me. I needed to go back to social work again. I liked having my own diary and meeting people and getting out and about. So went back to childcare for a bit. And then a job came up in the fostering and adoption team, and I wanted to go part-time. So went there. And I suppose most of my work at that stage was fostering. So it was recruiting and training and assessing foster carers, and then managing the foster placements, supporting the foster carers and working with the children and young people in foster care. So that would have taken me to, I'm not good at remembering dates. So that was probably up until about 20 years ago. And then I went to work in one of the voluntary adoption agencies as a social worker, and again was involved in recruiting, assessing and training people who wanted to apply to adopt, and also then helping people to search for birth family. So people who had been adopted years ago coming back to search for their birth family, usually birth parents, and working with them, providing counselling at that stage, because as social workers we could do that, counsel them in preparation for receiving birth certificates and their files and information about their birth family. And I suppose for me it was a natural progression into counselling. It wasn't a big, there was no huge big transition. I was doing some of the work anyway, and then the opportunity came up. I mean, I had thought about it before, I hadn't done anything about it, and then went back and did the certificate and diploma in counselling, and that's about 20 years ago. Yeah.
Just a couple of questions around that. So when you said that as social workers, you, I'm going to put inverted commas, counselled people that were seeking their birth families, I imagine, is that a very different type of counselling? What would that look like? What form does that take in that context?
Not that different. We would have, I suppose you're working alongside people. So as a social worker, you're trained, not as a counsellor, but you're trained, to assess and to work with people on a long-term basis. So for those people, it was spending time with them, probably not any different to what we're doing now, really. Preparing them too, because if someone is going to receive a birth certificate, especially from people who've been adopted years ago, there's not usually anything of significance for them on the birth certificate. So you have someone called John Brown now, who was called Jack Smith at birth. So, the work needed to be done there to prepare them for that. And having a piece of paper that isn't anything about you. So, yeah. And then for files as well. I mean, in Northern Ireland, people don't get third-party information. They only get information on themselves. But for the files that came over from England, everything was there. So it was preparing people for either way what they were going to receive. So, and I'm not saying I didn't need to do my counselling training, because I really did. And it's a very different role.
I completely understand, of course.
It's a very different role, obviously. But as social workers in the agencies, and I mean in social services, they would have prepared people for adoption as well, for receiving adoption information too.
So you're talking about, aren't you, working alongside people who are in a very vulnerable position and need to be treated with real sensitivity, understanding, expectations managed, and in terms of just trying to understand those similarities or differences with the therapeutic counselling. Is it, I suppose, about asking questions then? Is it about asking those questions and then finding those answers for themselves in a similar way?
Absolutely. And we would have been trained in that, within the agency. We would have been trained in what to do and how to do that. And I suppose it's pretty specific. It's not like receiving a referral now from a client, and you're setting out in a very different therapeutic role, I suppose, or road with them. It would have been very specific in terms of, the information, I suppose, that you'd want to find out from them, and the information that they would want to receive. So, I mean, people were usually very keen to find out information about their birth. Well, it's usually birth mothers, actually. There were very few who came forward looking for information about birth fathers. Some did, but and a lot of times birth fathers weren't mentioned on the birth certificates. So it was mostly about birth mothers. And then it was contacting the birth mother if we could do that. And then sometimes to going as far as reunions with people.
I always remember you saying that it's not quite like it appears on the TV all the time. What incredible work to have done. I imagine it was quite a humbling position to be in, and difficult to leave behind, difficult to move on, or were you very much ready to do that when you started the counselling training and qualified as a therapist?
I was doing some work, and then when I did qualify, 20 years ago was when I finished the diploma, and then I was doing some counselling work with birth parents. I was lead practitioner on a project that provided counselling and support for birth parents whose children had been removed and placed for adoption, and then when they were freed by the court to be adopted by their new families, we provided the counselling and support for them. So it was a very specific role. And I did that for about 6 years and then felt it was becoming too specialist. And also it was a regional job, so I was driving all the time. I was on the road all the time. And in me, I wanted to do more. I wanted to provide more counselling and I suppose develop a practice. So took the risk, nearly 11 years now in September, and resigned from my job. So that was a big risk because it was a good job. It was well paid, and decided to step out in private practice. And I don't regret it at all. It was the right move to make. And then I suppose because of the adoption background, I should say too, just before that, I finished a master's in counselling in 2014, is it? I'm not good at dates. Yeah. But, 2013, I think. But during that time, I had an opportunity to explore post-adoption depression. And if you want me to go on and talk about that, I can do that. But, during my time working as a social worker, I could see just the effect that having a child placed, especially older children, had on people. They wanted to be parents. They were really keen to parent. And then having an older child especially placed, just there were so many difficulties there, and I could see that there was something that wasn't right. And I hadn't heard of post-adoption depression at that stage. But and I can't talk about specific situations, obviously, but there were situations when I was very aware that children had to be removed again, and there was something that just didn't sit right for the person. All the dreams and aspirations they had didn't sit comfortably. It didn't fall into place, and the child didn't fulfill what they had wanted them to do. So I started looking around and then came across a study day in London on post-adoption depression, and was very fortunate that my agency allowed me to go to that. And that really, I suppose, sparked my interest and got me going. And then when I was doing the master's, my tutor had asked me what I wanted to do for my dissertation, and I had absolutely no hesitation. And it was great because she had a knowledge of adoption, so was very keen for me to do that too. So that was about 12 years ago. And then I left the agency the year after. And that was the start of me on my counselling journey, but also on this mission to educate people on post-adoption depression. So I suppose there are two sides to the work I do. There's the private practice, which is all sorts of counselling, with all sorts of different clients, but also then there's the adoption work that I do with the local authorities and privately across Northern Ireland and the UK.
I was just going to say, actually, that is still very much a part of your work, isn't it?
It's getting bigger. It's
really,
yeah.
In what sense, Lynda? In terms of it, just to check, I understand that's not just about the post-adoption depression, though, is it? Or is it?
When I did my research, all the mums that I interviewed had depression and been treated for depression, but nobody had actually been diagnosed with post-adoption depression. And I think that's just because it wasn't widely known about.
Mm-hmm.
And now, thankfully, more and more people are aware of it, and it's now included in assessments and training. But still, people have a sort of stigma around it. Quite a lot of referrals would be from the local authorities, where people are under pressure from the early days of a child being placed, maybe even in the first couple of weeks, right through to teenagers. Mm-hmm. And I suppose my role is to come in and offer counselling and support there, outside of the statutory services, which people really appreciate, because I don't write any reports back. It's confidential service, unless, of course, there are any, I suppose, if any issues arise, obviously I will have to say to them, I'll go back, but it is confidential, and the social workers that I work with know that, and people appreciate that.
Yeah, it is just for them. It's just about their well-being. Yeah, absolutely. And it's just worth just spending a few moments, perhaps, just taking a bit of a sidestep. And that's about the confusion that I think there's often been. And I appreciate there may be differences between England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, or not as the case may be, about working with adoptees specifically, and changes that have occurred in that. Are there just any thoughts or any information or knowledge that you would be able to share around that as it stands now in 2025?
Well, in the past, you would have needed to be trained in adoption work, but that Ofsted have lifted that. And some people see that as a very positive step, but others would feel that, you do need some training because it's a very complex issue. It's not the Disney, situation that people believe out there, that people adopt a child and they give them, a nice environment, take them on a holiday, and they all sort of disappear into the sunset together. But it is very complex because children do have other families out there. Even people who've been adopted, obviously, from years ago, they still have a birth family there. So, definitely I think a knowledge is needed. And I know that certainly other agencies are looking at providing training and making sure that there is good quality training out there for people who are going to offer counselling to adoptees. It's a very complex world, actually, and people don't realise that. And it's only when you get into it that you do see just the layers of that. And, certainly some other counsellors have contacted me and said, I didn't realise just how difficult this is. Can we signpost, or, can you give us some support here? And I know I'm not the only person who's doing that work. I appreciate that, and I'm not ever here to say that I am, but certainly I think that there is some training that's needed, and there's a task group being set up now in the next few weeks to look at that right across the UK, and I'm privileged to be part of that.
Oh, amazing. I think that would be really helpful to support people in that work, wouldn't it? I think the difficulty, and I can speak from personal experience here, is when when a client comes to see you, and it can be for any manner of different reasons, and then perhaps a little bit down the line, they may then disclose the adoption. They're an adult now, but that they were adopted as a child. And I think it just used to generate a lot of actually perhaps fear as well as confusion in practitioners about, okay, I don't think I'm supposed to work with adoptees, but what do I do now I have that relationship with the client? So I suppose it's freed up that a little bit. I suppose anybody interested, it's about exploring for some of that training and educating and informing themselves better.
And I think once the relationship's established, people can use somebody with expertise as a consultant and that, or maybe as a supervisor. I don't think you have to totally block that relationship. I don't think you have to refer either. I think if you've got the relationship established, you can see it through as long as you feel comfortable and competent, and can get some support for yourself. And I think be open and honest with the client and say,
absolutely.
Look, we all have to do that at times and say, that's not my area of expertise, but we've got that rapport established, and I'm happy to look into that with you and for you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course, complete sense. So, wow, accountant or potential accountant. I can't believe that you've kept that one hidden, Lynda. Into social work, and then what felt like, as you describe it, that very natural progression into counselling, while still being able very much to be involved with adopted families and the field, the whole field of adoption more generally. That's really helpful. What sort of, I suppose in a way you might have already answered this, but is there anything from that previous career as a social worker that you feel you have brought into your counselling work now? And of course, we've already sort of described some, real crossover sort of skills that you have. But is there anything else? I tell you why I ask. My very first Saturday job was as a waitress. 16 years old, every Saturday and Sunday outside of school hours, I was a waitress. And even now, at the grand old age of 54, I say that job set me up for pretty much every other job I've done since. So I just wondered if there are any other sort of aspects of your work within social work and with the families that you worked alongside that you feel perhaps set you apart in your counselling practice as well.
I think having the child protection experience,
Yeah, okay.
certainly, and having worked as a child protection social worker, safeguarding isn't frightening for me. I suppose it's part and parcel of who I am, and I know that's very useful to my supervisees. I think for me, the most important thing is regard and respect for people. And having worked in areas where people weren't at all well off and being in lots of their houses, for me, it's treating everybody the same. And that's been the whole thing for me right through, and I hope it's still the same. But it was, not judging, but seeing people for who they were. And I suppose in some ways I'd have been very defensive of people in certain areas when they were criticised. Maybe I was, with people and they criticised people who lived in certain areas or maybe from certain estates, and I would and still would be very defensive because, they're humans like all the rest of us. And for me, it's about regard and respect and that non-judgmentalism. I'm not perfect, of course I'm not, but I think that's something that I've brought with me. And obviously the skills are transferable. There's lots of transferable skills in terms of notes and how we keep records, and well, certainly our records aren't as detailed as social work records, but that's been useful. And then also because I had done a business studies course before that, the lots of sort of transferable skills in terms of typing and writing reports and things like that. So I don't believe that anything's a mistake in life. I think, we travel this sort of bumpy, bendy road to get to where we are. And yes, there have been lots of difficult times and lots of really anxious times. But yeah, I think it's made me the person I am today.
I think you said I don't find safeguarding scary. And I think some people do. I think even the word or the prospect of perhaps having to become engaged in that process can be quite scary for people. And again, regardless of how well trained you might be, when you find yourself in the position of having to do that for the first time, it's not always easy. And I suppose actually, if we think of it from a counselling perspective as well, that relationship that we're there, in many ways to protect at all costs and to hold at the heart of what we do. Of course, we know breaking confidentiality, safeguarding at times, regardless how necessary it is, you can just catch yourself and go, but, what if they never forgive me? What if this breaks it? But of course, it's what it needs to be. Absolutely. It's really interesting, Lynda. You and I know each other pretty well, and we've spent a lot of time together. It's really interesting, though, just having this very focused conversation with you. What's really coming out to me is that I think I'm thinking a lot of newly qualified practitioners or students. I'm thinking of, because I was just going to ask you about starting out in private practice, how that was for you. That's quite a difficult thing in itself to do. You've talked about being a lecturer. You've talked about being a trainer and educating and informing people in all manner of ways. And maybe that's why I'm holding, I know you're a supervisor. So there's obviously this part of you as well that is very generous in your, I'm going to use the word enjoyment, I hope it's enjoyment, of sharing your knowledge, of sharing your skills and expertise and experience with others, passing that on and spreading that net widely. So, yeah, it's really interesting that's what's foremost in my mind. And I think that's why I just said that about safeguarding as well, because I remember what that's like when, you're newly starting out. So what about that element of what you do as well? I know you're passionate particularly about good counselling training, it being effective, it being relational and all that sort of stuff. So is there anything you'd like to say about that and how you see things, perhaps particularly from a Northern Ireland perspective at the moment?
I think it's really vital for students to be person-centred in their base. I think sort of sometimes people are very quick to use handouts and tools, but I think we need to get to know the person. And I think for me, the relationship's the most important.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been working with some students on that over the last few years in supervision. I think that's most important, is the relationship, and then the tools can come along if we need them. But I think we shouldn't be afraid of the relationship and the rapport building and getting to know the client and what makes them tick, and not putting people into boxes. I don't like that. I think it's important that each person's treated as an individual.
So to clarify, so when you say person-centred, you don't mean the core person-centred approach, you just mean having an individual and all that they bring in their unique world, all they bring to us and us getting to know that. You're not necessarily talking about the Rogerian person-centred approach.
I'm not talking about CBT therapists or very specialist therapists, but I think, if we're starting out as counsellors, then I feel we need that person-centred, poor conditions base. And relationship building.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I've asked people maybe, a question about their client in supervision, and they haven't been able to answer it because they haven't really got to know the person. But that's about fear as well. And we've all had to start somewhere. And I suppose I was fortunate in that for me, it was a continuity, from social work into counselling. And for people who are starting out who haven't had that, it's much more fearful, isn't it? Working with your first client and getting to know people, and maybe there's that fear of not having the next line sort of rehearsed, and I think it takes time and effort and energy and risk to get to that stage.
You're so right. It's like learning to drive, isn't it? We learn to drive to pass our tests, don't we, and do everything we need to do, and then it just sort of and you sort of hold on to that, don't you? You hold on to those knowns, those things you've been told, and it's time and it's experience, and it's what we learn from clients, isn't it? Essentially, that then helps us evolve and grow through that.
There's
But
something
to come
about
back to
pacing
the
as well at the
sorry,
client,
go
going
on.
at the client's pace and letting them determine that pace rather than, sometimes people say in supervision, but what should I do next? And I'll say, well, what do you think the client should do next? What would the client want to do next? Maybe you need to ask them. So, I think it's not about us having an agenda, but it's there letting them work through their agenda. And it takes time. It takes time to get to that stage, doesn't it? To build up that confidence to be able to do that.
Oh, absolutely. That's such a good point about the pacing, isn't it? Because again, I think as a newbie, we're sort of anxiously wanting perhaps to see those results or looking for those outcomes. And of course, that's about us, and it shouldn't be about us. And to sit in those uncomfortable places and do that perhaps sometimes for a few weeks feels like sometimes you're not doing. I remember when I first did out, sort of feeling like I wasn't doing the work. I should be doing more than this, and obviously taking that into supervision, just learning to just sit with it, to just slow down and learn the rhythm and, like you say, the pace of the client. But I just want to take that back to training. So you're saying that there, for you, it's a strong belief that counselling training at its best will be very much grounded in those relational type approaches, teaching and skills. And you still do some training yourself outside of the adoption, is that right? Or
right, training for new adopters and for social workers and anybody else who wants it. Mostly around the psychological impact of adoption. So I've delivered those here and online as well, and I'm going to be doing another national one and some courses for one of the counselling providers as well. So in the process of working on those and writing those over the next few months. So lots going on.
So my my next question was going to be, well, and sort of, to equally let people know, although I'm sure by the time this comes out, there will be an awareness out there. But you have very kindly and generously accepted our invitation to be the regional representative for Northern Ireland for the NCPS. And that felt like a very natural thing to do. You've worked closely and generously alongside us and supported us and challenged us as long as we've known you and as time's gone on. And I know you're fiercely proud of what your work in Northern Ireland, and I've grown to love Northern Ireland myself and the people there and our members there and the times I've come across. But we know that, all regions, all areas have their very specific challenges and needs. We've just been talking about, seeing the individual, and sometimes it's about seeing the individual place and what's happening there and what's going on there. So is there anything that you can help? I suppose it's twofold, isn't it? It's helping anybody that's listening from Northern Ireland understand what it is that perhaps they might be able to get in touch with you about, you feel you want to be able to do for them, but also about helping anybody that doesn't know Northern Ireland that well or hasn't got any experience of being there, understand just what some of those very specific challenges are that practitioners are facing on the ground.
Yeah, I think in terms of Northern Ireland, sometimes we get bad press. Sometimes we're represented as the place we were 20, 30 years ago, and we're not anymore. And different regions are dealing with different issues. Some people are very much in terms working with families who've suffered a lot during the Troubles. Other people aren't. It depends on where you are. So we're not all in one box. We don't all fit very neatly into one box. And I think that's hard for people outside maybe to understand. And I think as more people come here to visit or for weekends or whatever, they see maybe that we are not really very much different to anybody else. So I don't think we fit very well as one. I think in different areas, people are dealing with different issues. And obviously, in some, there are some parts of Northern Ireland where the suicide rate is very high, for example, where poverty and deprivation, like in England, Wales, Scotland, wherever, you're going to have those issues. And then we've got obviously the post-conflict or troubles related issues as well. But I think we have very common issues as well as people across the water. So it's hard to put us all into one box because we don't fit neatly. That probably doesn't answer your question.
Oh, do you know what? It does.
Treat us as individuals, not as a big group. And I'm sure you've learned that coming over here too, that, we're all very different and just like everybody else out there.
I think that is such a good point, Lynda. And it makes me check myself, actually, because it feels like such a natural question to ask, tell me about Northern Ireland in that sense. But if somebody said to me, talk about England in that sense, I don't know where I would start because I live in rural Somerset and my experience of living here is going to be very different to somebody living in, inner city London, for example. And you're absolutely right to say, well, it's not just Northern Ireland, it's those different regions breaking down into different communities, different families, and then different individuals like it would be anywhere. Now, I think that's a really good point to make. And actually, the other thing you made me think about is I think I can speak personally, I can speak thinking of many of the clients that I've seen where we will often say, I've been through this particular experience or trauma or diagnosis or whatever that might be, and we'll say, but I don't want to be defined by it. And you're making me think of that a little bit. Yes, of course, Northern Ireland has had, that the history that we all know of, but it doesn't define who you all are necessarily. So I think it's a brilliant answer.
But I think, if you're talking to different people in different places, they'll have had different experiences. And I've worked in some of those areas, where there's a lot of deprivation and, high suicide rates. And I sometimes do see people, but I suppose where I'm located now, I'm outside of the city, and I'm not working with those issues every day, although suicide, I suppose, is something we're all working with all the time because there's such a high rate, and that goes right across the board. So I think we all have different experiences. If you had a group of counsellors together, as we've had recently, you're going to have people who are in inner city areas where it's very different to those of us working in a more rural setting. So, yeah. But I suppose my thing is always don't put us all in the one box. Just treat us as individuals as we want to be treated. And I'm sure people listening to this may not agree, but it's okay.
No, absolutely, that's okay. And, hopefully as this podcast grows and goes on, to me it still feels like it's in its very early stages. But, other people's voices will be heard. In fact, I think our next recording is going to be with somebody else from Northern Ireland. So, it'll be interesting to see what they say. We've got lots of you. Speaking of which, so coming back to that regional representative role, what is it? I suppose perhaps actually it's a better question to ask, what do you hope to develop? What do you hope to create from that? It's a brand new role. It's not something that we've done before, but something we've wanted to do for a long time. And it will be very much co-created and collaborative with you. What is it that you're hoping to be able to do with that role?
I'm really interested in people and what they're doing out there in different organisations and agencies and individuals. And so I suppose for me, it's getting to know some more of those organisations and people. And, I'm not there to make any decisions, obviously, on behalf of the organisation or anything like that. But I'm certainly happy to talk to people either on an individual basis or group basis if they would find that useful, and certainly to share any experience I have that would be useful. Again, I'm open to that as well. It's early days, isn't it? It's only starting off now, and there have been a couple of times when I have represented the agency recently or the organisation at events. So hopefully that will continue. It's not going to be a huge part of my job because time, is going to, I suppose, not allow that either. And that's not what you're anticipating either. But certainly it's getting to know people and share experiences and learn from them too. My motto is every day is a school day, and I love to pick up new bits of information and meet new people and find out what's going on out there. And it's always useful too in working with supervisees and other people. You can pass that information on as well. So hopefully I'll be a link in a chain. That's the way I would see it, to pass on information as is needed. I suppose there are times when people have applied for jobs, for example, and NCPS hasn't been accepted, or they have had difficulties. So it's, I suppose, signposting people to yourself or whoever else in the organisation in relation to that. So things like that.
Of course, completely. It's about us learning together, I think, isn't it? About who's out there, what it is that's needed, what we could do in addition to what we're already doing, or what we could do differently. And so just trying to learn from, as you said, and listen to people out there so that we can then start adapting and putting resources, out accordingly. So, and we're really grateful to you for being those eyes and ears on the ground out there.
In Ireland, we've said this lots of times. You and I've talked about this lots of times. We often feel abandoned over here. Yeah. We feel that, everything is English-based, London-based usually, and we are out on a limb and sort of an added extra. So I think people here feel that if there's somebody on the ground, or if, yourselves have an interest in what's going on with us, that we like that. We don't like to be abandoned or seen as second class.
Oh, absolutely not. You're very much a part of what we do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And I suppose it's letting people see too that NCPS is regarded and as good as any other organisation.
Well, just before I hit record today, I said to you, there's always this part of the conversation that I want to get to with each guest, and time always runs away with us. But I'm hoping, looking at the time, that we might have a few minutes where we can talk about a couple of things. One is always being mindful that in this profession that we both work in, and similar professions, I'm sure social work actually may very well have been the same, could be a profession very much that you live, you don't leave at the office door sort of thing. And therefore self-care is a really important part of what we do. So it would be lovely to just find out, what works for you, what helps you decompress, de-stress, and just as best you can put clients out of your mind. Are there any sort of go-to things that you enjoy?
I've got rituals.
You've got rituals. Go on.
I have rituals. Yeah, I work from home. So This is my therapy room that we're talking in today.
Okay.
So when I finish work, I always change. I always change my clothes.
I see.
I always did that as a social worker, and I still do that. So when I finish work, I get changed. Then I usually go off to make dinner with either some music on or the radio, or the chase is good to unwind too. So I would do that, have some music or have something on while I make dinner, and then walk. Walking is my big thing, and I can, in 10 minutes, I can be at the coast. 10 minutes walking, I'm at the coast, and that clears my head. So unless it's absolutely lighting out of the heavens, I will walk, and I find that clears my head. Just go and do something different. Walk, go for coffee, do nice things. Yeah,
I think that's such a good point, Lynda. And it's funny, I can't remember. I've got a horrible feeling I might have mentioned this on one of the earlier podcasts. But I've always, for me, I'll be really honest, it was because I used to have a very young family when I first started, and I first sort of qualified. And so it was always very important to me to keep work and family very separate. And for me, because I always worked in an office until now, in a separate office space until very recently. For me, I used to come home, I would walk through the door, my children would be home if I hadn't done the sort of the school pickup or whatever, and they would know that I would have a very similar ritual to you. I would go upstairs, get changed out of work clothes. And then for me, because I had little ones at home, I couldn't sort of necessarily just go off for a walk. But what I would do is I was lucky enough to have a garden, and I would go out in a garden and just go out in bare feet and just feel whatever was out there, ever under my feet, whatever was above me in the sky. And my kids knew that the moment I walked back in through my back door, then I was mum again.
Mummy was back.
Yeah, and it was only out of necessity. I wasn't trying to be clever. It wasn't anything but it just felt like the natural thing to do. So I can really relate to that. And even now, for the most part, it's different. I work pretty much mostly from home. Like yourself, have a very separate room. I don't do anything else in that room. And actually, even if I'm not seeing clients all day and I don't have any meetings, I'll still tend to have work clothes and my own personal casual clothes, just for that differentiation. But just whether there's, and I'm thinking perhaps particularly in terms of your adoption work, whether you've got any recommendations for sort of further reading or further resources that just might be of interest for anybody that's listening to this, that it's piqued their interest in terms of adoption work, post-adoption depression and things like that.
Can I just grab a book here? Anybody who's interested or is in the early stages of finding out about adoption, to buy a book called The Post-Adoption Blues by Karen Foley and John Thompson. It's a really good, I call it the Post-Adoption Bible, because it has everything, it's so readable, it's got so much information in it, and it would be useful for any counsellors as well as for people who are starting out in that journey.
So it's sort of quite accessible.
Very readable.
Yeah.
And it's on Amazon for about £10 or something. But yeah. So I think that, to me, that's a really good buy.
Yeah. That's great, and I can put that in there. People will be very used to this. I can put a link to it in the notes that accompany the podcast. So, anything else at all that comes to mind? Not necessarily adoption related.
I haven't written my book yet. When I do, I'll send you the first copy.
Thank you to Lynda for joining us today, and thank you for listening in. This podcast is brought to you by the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, a professional home for counsellors, psychotherapists, and over 120 wellbeing organisations across the UK. Autonomy, diversity, creativity, and community are at the heart of what we do. We're creating a positive space for conversations with people who share common beliefs and goals, because together, our voice is louder. If you would like to know more about the NCPS, please visit www.ncps.com for more information. And please remember to follow and subscribe to this podcast so you're always part of the conversation.